Home. For me, home is Boston. Even after living in Syracuse for a year, coming back to Boston felt like coming home. It is where my family and a lot of my friends are. It is where I form countless memories, and it is where I truly feel at home. However, home has a different meaning for everyone, and thus during the many periods of human history, it has constantly been bent and reimagined as both a concept and a word. Eh, the earliest known rough translation of the word home. It comes from the Sumerian civilization, believed to be the oldest in history. Though its pronunciation is quite simple, its cuneiform symbol reveals its true meaning. By the end of the pre-dynastic period of Egyptian history, various artisans created the hieroglyphic script. A noble script, only allowed to be written and read by a select few, it still, however, became a popular way to record history. Rather than being a literary language, it was a logogram, and instead of words, it consisted of various symbols. Because of this, in ancient Egyptian written history, there is no word for home, simply a symbol. Thousands of years later, Persian warlord Cyrus the Great stood on the ashes of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. With their destruction, he had also freed a number of people enslaved by the Babylonians, including a large portion of the early Jewish peoples. The Neo-Babylonians had crushed their old kingdom of Judah, burned down their holy temple of Solomon, and deported roughly 30% of all the people of Judah. Their main settlements had been ravaged. However, as long as they were alive, the Jewish people always had their Bith. Hundreds of miles away, on the frigid coasts of what is now northern Germany, a variety of descendants of northern Bronze Age Danes, nomads from the newly emerging Celtic Hallstatt culture, and various other early Germanic groups coalesced to form the Jastrow material culture. A great homogeneous mixture of nomads and peoples who had lived there for generations, they certainly all held a different view of what home was. However, this is where our modern word of home can be traced back to, as it is a descendant of the Proto-Germanic Heim. During the 2nd century of the Common Era, Rome had reached its zenith. Hundreds of peoples had been subjugated under the great Roman eagle, and had either through peaceful means, but usually through force, been integrated into the Latin world. Much like the Romans who had risen from a simple city-state into one of the greatest empires in history, their language of Latin had also began as a minor language used by Roman farmers. By the peak of the Roman Empire, it was viewed as the language of high civilization and was used by royal and intellectual elites for centuries. The Romans were revolutionary in their standardization of many aspects of their government and military, which made it seemingly elite, and their definition of a domus, relative of the English word domicile, showed the unambiguous and standardized nature of the Latin language. Long after the Roman Empire had fallen, a completely different civilization on almost the other side of the world quickly swallowed up almost all of Asia, and was surging towards Europe. The Mongolians had been a relatively simple nomadic peoples who did not hold a single piece of land that was their permanent settlement before the rise of Genghis Khan. Thus, before their eventual settlement in cities, their yurts, tents which were constantly moved to different locations, were their ger. I have told you what my definition of home was, and have now shown you various other meanings for it throughout history. But what about people today? For this part of the project, I wasn't able to ask too many people as I just recently got home. However, I did ask a few people in my family. My little brother, who granted does not speak much English, went to hug my dog when I asked him what home was. My parents, on the other hand, both gave a more boring answer, but also exactly the same one, as they simply said it was a place where they could come home after work and relax. While the response was sort of dull, for the sake of the project, it may also be an insight on what Russian people think a home is. Now, to wrap this all up, I don't want to sound cliche, but for the sake of my final argument, I will. Home is what you make it, and throughout history, people have always had differing opinions on what a home was. Whether it was simply just the building which you lived in, like in Sumerian and Egyptian logogram, or a group of people, like for the Jewish, home is an ambiguous thing, and I don't think there is a single definition for it.